human beings have long participated in this quest of understanding the universe around them and to make sense of this world. They have done it through religion, and then they have done it through science. And often these two mechanisms have locked horns with each other. And in this battle, at least in the last 20, 30 or 40 years, Richard Dawkins has been at the forefront. He started his career as an evolutionary biologist and a writer of science, and then he moved on to become something we know as an atheist celebrity. And it is through former that he comes to the latter, that is, he has his roots in science, in reason, and then he goes against the idea of religion and God. And it will be fair to say that he has had tremendous impact on the world in how we see the things, how we interpret them, and how we see the universe around ourselves. In order to understand his work, we have to go back to the beginning, around the time when he first wrote his book, The Selfish Gene. It was published in 1976, and the book was revolutionary in many ways. It changed our understanding of Darwinian theory of evolution. Until then, there was a lot of debate about the Darwinian theory or the interpretation of it, the survival of the fittest or the natural selection as we know it. Soon after the death of Darwin in 19th century and until the middle of 20th century, either Darwin was mostly ignored or he was misinterpreted in many ways by the biologists. It was interpreted as the selfishness of the individual, and by survival of the fittest, many understood that it was just about surviving, and every individual will make every effort to survive. Now, that raised a lot of problems. For example, altruism. How do we understand that, and how do we make sense of it in the light of theory of evolution? And it was in 1960s when biologists like William Hamilton proposed this idea of gene. So they did not say that the natural selection was happening at the individual level, nor it was happening at group level, but at the level of the gene. And this was something that struck Dawkins. And he set out to write a book trying to understand the gaps between altruism and selfishness in the light of theory of evolution. Now, what does that mean? It means that the fundamental identity which is operating through life or participating in life is gene. According to Dawkins, gene is almost immortal. That is, genes are going to replicate one after the other, and this has been going on for millions of years. And Dawkins sees us as the vehicles for genes, and that's all we are, operating under the influence of genes. So what genes are doing, they are participating in reproduction. Two genes, father and mother, and then it gets replicated in the child's genes, and that gene is getting, by gene I mean the genetic information part, that is getting shared among siblings and relatives. Of course it's not the same genetic information, there is certain difference, but then that genetic information is getting passed on from one generation to another, and it is at this level Dawkins operates or thinks. So in that sense, gene is divided between individual as well as group. What I mean by that is you have certain gene, but a part of it is also shared among your family members, your siblings, your previous generations, and the generations after you. So gene is distributed among people, among a group of people, and it's about the survival of the gene. So at one level, it explains the selfishness of the individual, how that person is trying to protect himself or herself, but at the same time, the gene is distributed in the group, so you find certain empathy towards your kins, your family members, because it's the gene that is trying to influence you. Note that it still doesn't explain the altruism outside your relatives or family members, but still it explains much of it. For the other part, the altruism or compassion outside your immediate family members, it could be explained easily through the mechanism of cooperation and how eventually that helps an individual or a group. But you can see how it can be misinterpreted and in fact can be manipulated, this whole idea, into some kind of racist theories, or to explain how we care more about our own race than the other race or other communities. That happened with Dawkins, but he was very quick to respond to it, and he made sure that this wasn't misinterpreted. At the same time, he proposed that the political ideas or the kind of political landscape that we aspire to have in the society, that is very different from evolutionary biology. In his words, he says, it's true that we are the product of evolution, but it's also true that we have grown a brain big enough that we can rebel against it. So this was only the first chapter of Dawkins' profession or life. The second one starts with his 1986 book called The Blind Watchmaker. And this is where he enters a different field, somewhat political and somewhat controversial. Still pursuing science, still going by reason, but this time he's challenging the status quo, the religious establishment, and which got really offended because this book onwards, he tries to persuade the world that there is no intelligent design, there is no God, and most of the things that religions teach, they are lies. He attends this God argument in a much nuanced and a better way in his book, The God Delusion, which was published in 2006. This book was published around the time when he was a part of this group called the Four Horsemen. The other members were Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Dan Dennett. All four of them, they came from different backgrounds, all atheists, and trying to discuss and trying to propose a case for science and reason. You should watch or read their discussions known as the Four Horsemen. That's also quite interesting. But through the God delusion, Dawkins tries to make sense of religions and where they go wrong, and he challenges the very beliefs and how different societies, as per their conveniences, have created their own gods. Now, this might upset a lot of people, and perhaps that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to make a strong case for reason and persuade people that there is no such thing. Now, many people, many critics believe that this does not help, that he's pandering to the wishes of atheist community, and he's not really doing anything to reach out to the religious community, and they stay the same. But I think this makes a difference for a lot of young people who haven't made up their mind yet, or who are still agnostic, still confused about this idea. And he makes a strong case for science or atheism. His recent book, published in 2019, called Outgrowing God, works or discusses the same subject, and he goes more into the morality and the future ahead, and questions like, do we need God to be good and to be moral, and how can we lead a good life if there was no God, or if there is no God? What do we do in that case? So as you see, a lot of work has been around the idea of science versus religion or religious beliefs. But the foundation has always been that of evolutionary biology, where he uses the foundation of Darwin's theory of evolution, the naturalist argument, to explain a lot of things in the universe about life, about everything that exists now, and why it is the way it is. So, whether you are a believer or non believer, either way, it's very important to understand the arguments from atheist perspective, and how do they tackle the question of God, what are the philosophical underpinnings, what are the reasons, what are the arguments they are proposing. It's very important to read those arguments. And besides, his work on evolutionary biology, the selfish gene, is a treat. Just like Harari's Sapien, it should be read by everybody, regardless of their backgrounds, their education. It's quite interesting that way. So I hope you'll read his works, you'll come up with your own conclusions. But in any case, I'm sure you'll have a good time.